I'm Tom Beebekauser with Wetland Restoration and Training. We are on the Wayne National Forest in southern Ohio, and we're going to be looking at wetlands that I helped build with the U.S. Forest Service starting 30 years ago. We're going to be inspecting them and finding out what vegetation is growing. Are they holding water as planned? Do they need any maintenance? Well, let's get started. You're looking at a wetland I helped build on the Wayne National Forest in Ohio 31 years ago. I started working with the Forest Service to build wetlands on the Wayne National Forest in 1995. The Wayne National Forest is in southern Ohio. Kathy Flago was a wildlife biologist on the Ironton Ranger District of the Wayne National Forest. She heard I was building wetlands on the Danube National Forest in Kentucky and asked for my help. I invited her to come visit and see what we were doing. She accepted and brought several co-workers with her. This is one of the restored wetlands we looked at on March 3rd, 1993. Kathy and I had worked together on the Superior National Forest in Minnesota. She moved to Ohio in 1985. I moved to Kentucky in 1988. Kathy invited me to go across the Ohio River and take a look at some areas with her to see if they had potential for restoring wetlands. We examined tracts of land the Forest Service recently purchased to add to the Wayne National Forest. These land parcels contain agricultural fields that have been created by draining wetlands. This map shows the locations of the wetland projects we eventually completed on the Ironton Ranger District from 1995 to 2014. This video will focus on looking at each site in detail. All of the wetlands we built were for enhancement, not for compensatory mitigation. We named the first area identified for wetland construction Pine Creek. The Pine Creek site contained large agricultural fields. This Google Earth image, taken on March 12, 1995, shows ditches, moved and channeled streams, and dark areas in the field. All these show that farmland was created by the historic drainage and filling of wetlands. We purposely did not include streams bordering the fields at Pine Creek in the wetland restoration project. We kept the streams and the deep ditches out of the wetland restoration area because we are concerned about too much water washing out dams and because of the possible conflict with direction contained in the Land and Resource Management Plan for the Wayne National Forest. Kathy and I used an old-fashioned optical level to record elevations in the field. The level helped us mark an area on the ground with a 3-foot change in elevation from upper to lower edge. We left wide buffers of trees and shrubs along the edges of the ditches and streams to meet the direction in the forest plan. We used a soil auger to test the soil texture in the field and found it was high in clay. The test holes we dug showed that there were sandy soils near Pine Creek, with clay texture soils being further away from the stream. Kathy worked with other Forest Service employees to complete a biological evaluation, cultural resource survey, and NEPA documentation for the project. The purpose of the project was to increase the amount of wetland habitat for plant and animal diversity, to absorb floodwater, and to remove water pollutants. Discussions and meetings were held with Forest Service Supervisor's Office personnel and partners, including the Ohio Division of Wildlife, Ducks Unlimited, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to obtain funding for the project. After the approval and funding were in place, we prepared a requisition for a service contract that was mailed to contractors asking if they were interested in providing and operating 2 large dozers with skilled operators to build the wetlands. Each heavy equipment operator would be paid by the hour for doing productive work, not by the job. This would save us the high expense that's associated with preparing engineering plans and specifications. We kept the total amount of the heavy equipment contract under $25,000. This was to avoid the requirement to advertise a larger contract nationwide. The service contract for the project was awarded to Allen Construction in Kentucky. I had good success working with the owner of the company, Steve Allen, to build similar wetlands on the Danube National Forest. The wide trackless dozers would help keep the heavy machines from getting stuck in the mud. A few weeks prior to construction, the Ohio Division of Wildlife mowed the field with a tractor and a bush hog. We used an optical level along with wooden stakes and colored plastic flagging to mark the dam we planned to build for the wetland. it would be necessary for us to build a dam 4 feet high to flood the entire field. This height was chosen because there was a 3-foot change in elevation over the area that we had marked, and we needed to add another foot to the dam to allow for the spillway. I was concerned that the soil in the field would be too wet to build a dam, so we hired an individual with a backhoe to dig a ditch that would drain the field in advance of construction. You can see water collecting in the ditch soon after it was dug. Construction of the wetland began in August 1995 using 2 bulldozers with operators. Having 2 dozers allowed us to make steady progress between frequent rainstorms. Just as importantly, 1 dozer was always available to pull the other one free when it became stuck in the mud. Our first step was to use the dozers to remove topsoil from a large area where we planned to obtain the soil that was needed to build the dam. The topsoil was removed from an area within about 300 feet of the dam that we were building. The dozers pushed 1/2 the topsoil downhill just past the dam we were building. We would eventually use this topsoil to build the back slope of the dam. The other half of the topsoil was pushed uphill, beyond where clay soil would be dug out to build the pool and the dam. A serious problem with building the large wetland with the dam was that the shallow basin would fill with water after a rain. Because southern Ohio receives heavy rains in the summer, we learned quickly how important it was to maintain a network of temporary ditches during construction that would drain away standing water. We learned the hard way about the importance of maintaining ditches during construction and had to use pumps to drain a large pool of water that had collected after the first downpour. Our next step was to dig a core trench at the same location where the dam would be built. The dozer on the right has started digging the core trench, while the dozer on the left is moving topsoil away from the trench being dug. It was important to dig the core trench deep enough to uncover and to remove buried drainage structures that were made from clay tile and plastic. I watched closely as the core trench was dug to make sure that we removed the sand and gravel layers and any deposits of topsoil where wetlands had been filled in the past. The dozers would remove, then shift, mix, and add clay texture soil in the core trench in layers, compacting each layer to form a groundwater dam. The dozers would often get stuck digging the core trench. This is because they had to dig so deep they hit groundwater when removing the drainage structures. Few contractors owned or used excavators when we started building wetlands in Ohio. Once contractors acquired excavators in the late 1990s, we found that pairing an excavator with a dozer was the most effective and efficient way to dig a core trench and to build a groundwater dam. Once the groundwater dam was built, the dozers began building an above-ground dam. The above-ground dam was built on top of the groundwater dam. The soil needed to build the dam was obtained by digging clay out of the planned wetland basin, then pushing this clay with the dozer to where the dam was being built. The dozer operator would build the dam in layers, making sure to compact each layer with the tracks of the dozer to form a dam. We worked to build dams with gentle 20% slopes on the front and the back, with a level top at least 14 feet wide. We used an optical level and a rod to monitor the elevation of the dam being built. The next step was to install a water control structure that was combined with a drain pipe. We used 6-inch or 8-inch diameter PVC Schedule 35 SDR gasketed pipe and inline water control structures from Fiberglass Utility Supply Company in Iowa. Here, Kathy Flago is using a non-hardening waterproof caulk called TC40 to seal the gap between the pipe and the anti-seep collar. We use shovels to place soil around the water control structure and the anti-seep collar and compacted the soil by hand using a steel spud bar. The dozer operator is filling soil around the water control structure and over the pipe. He's using great care not to crush the pipe. Now the dozer is using topsoil to build the backside of the dam. We could use topsoil that was more permeable than clay because the backside of the dam did not have to be made to hold water. This is because the center of the dam and the groundwater dam were made out of clay, and this clay was compacted to form a barrier to the movement of water underground. We worked to shape gradual 5-to-1 slopes on both sides of the dam so it would be possible to mow the dam with a tractor and a bush hog. We then built a few islands for waterfowl to use for nesting. We then spread the topsoil that was saved in the graded wetland basin. The dozer operator spread the topsoil so that it was thick in some places and thinner in others, and this was done to promote plant diversity. We took many elevations along the top of the dam to make sure it was level. The dozer operators took time to level the top of the dam and to build up low places so that water would not flow over the dam and cause erosion. We then built a spillway for the wetland near the base of the hill. The spillway was constructed 6 inches lower than the top of the dam, was approximately 12 feet wide. It was designed to prevent floodwater from overtopping and washing out the dam. The spillway was armored with rock to control erosion. However, we later discovered that some of the spillways were inadequate for handling the massive volumes of water flowing across the floodplain during a severe storm. We placed a metal box with a locking lid over the top of the water control structure to help protect it from being damaged by humans. The dozer operators placed fallen trees on the dam to discourage off-highway vehicle drivers from turning the dam into a racetrack. Unfortunately, the trees we placed on the dam made it difficult to mow the dam. The dam and islands were seeded to control erosion. The exposed soil on the dam and spillway were also mulched with a thick layer of wheat straw to control erosion. Here's how the Pine Creek wetland appeared the day it was finished. Puddles formed in the basin after the first rain. Look carefully for Ed McFadden's head and shoulders. He's standing at the base of the dam. This showed us the dam that was built was about 5 feet high. This map shows the wetland we built at Pine Creek. The Forest Service erected a sign where people were first likely to see the new wetland. The Pine Creek wetland filled with water naturally in the fall of 1995. Here's how the wetland appeared the first winter after construction. This photo that was taken in the summer of 1996 shows that the wetland held water all year. The water was colored brown with soil in March of 1997. Water surrounding the trees shows that the dam was built high enough to flood the entire field. Here's how the Pine Creek wetland appears 31 years after it was built. Ashley Kofluski, the wildlife biologist on the Ironton Ranger District, and I examined the wetland in January of 2026. The Pine Creek wetland looked natural with its shallow water bays and irregular shaped islands of cattails and bulrushes. There were many muskrat houses that were made from the American lotus that was growing in the wetland. The lotus is a native species in Ohio and was not planted when we built the wetland. It was almost impossible to see where the long and high dam had been built. The wetland is a textbook example of how an emergent palustrine wetland is supposed to appear. We inspected the dam for damage from muskrat burrows and couldn't find any. The top of the dam was saturated and had become a wet meadow and shrub-scrub wetland. The inside edge of the dam was varied. It had shallow bays and inlets, while the top of the dam had developed naturally with pits and mounds. This is where beaver dug a canal across the top of the dam that we had made from clay. Beaver then plugged the canal once it started flowing. The water level on both sides of the dam is nearly equal because beaver also built a dam across the ditch draining water from the Pine Creek wetland. It was not possible to walk on top of the dam in many places because of the dense growth of blackberries with their sharp thorns. The blackberries, multiflora rose, and trees that were growing on the backside of the dam were growing there because that's where we had spread the topsoil. We were unable to locate the water control structure and the drain pipe that we had installed. We didn't have GPS coordinates for the structure because this technology wasn't available to the public until the year 2000. I suspect that beaver had buried the water control structure and the drain pipe under huge amounts of vegetation and soil. Here is where beaver built a low dam out of plants and soil on top of the dam we constructed in 1995. They did this to keep water from flowing over the top of the dam. We could see that beaver had built their own dam over the entire dam that we had constructed. The red arrows point to the spillway we constructed that beaver have now blocked with a dam. With beaver blocking both the water control structure and the spillway, the only remaining way for water to leave the wetland was by flowing over the dam. Normally, water flowing over a dam will cause the dam to erode and wash out. This didn't occur because the beaver had constructed additional dams made of vegetation and soil on top of the constructed dam, sealing areas where water started flowing over our dam. It is no longer possible to use a tractor to mow this dam because the tractor would get stuck and end up underwater in the wetland. The beaver were controlling the shrubs and the trees that could cause the dam to leak. The dam has now become a permanent part of the landscape that does not require maintenance. One of our concerns when we built the wetland was that off-highway vehicles might damage the dam and the basin. This was because the site was within sight of a managed OHV trail. My concern with OHVs went away as the wetland matured. Because of the dense growth of trees and shrubs, it made it impossible for any off-highway vehicle to drive on the dam. During construction of the dam, we needed more soil so we could build up the dam across a deep diversion ditch that was near the base of the hill. To obtain the soil, we dug a pit in the field next to the ditch. We then shaped the pit into a vernal pond without building a dam. We kept the basin shallow with gradual slopes. This vernal pond looked great after 31 years. I was surprised and thrilled to see that beavers had built wetlands in places where we didn't build them 31 years ago. They had constructed dams across the channel streams that had bordered the wetlands we had built, and some of the beaver dams even tied into the dam we had constructed. The beavers were successful because these ditches carried water across nearly level ground and their banks were low and stable rather than high and eroding. Here's the most recent Google Earth aerial photo showing the Pine Creek wetland. The photo was taken on April 22, 2025. We're now going to look at the wetlands we built at Sand Fork Creek in Lawrence County, Ohio. I worked with Kathy Flagel to build these in September 1996. The purpose of the project was to increase the amount of wetland habitat for plant and animal diversity, to absorb floodwater, and to remove water pollutants. Strips were often plowed in the fields to facilitate examination by an archaeologist who was completing the required Phase 1 Culture Resource Survey prior to construction. We built the wetlands and agricultural fields that were separated by the moved and channeled Sand Fork Creek. The fields were located on the floodplain of Sand Fork Creek. Here's how the wetlands appeared 30 years after construction. The wetlands were built using two Model 1150 case dozers owned by Earl J. Osborne from Morgan County, Kentucky. Earl's sons Billy and Donnie Osborne operated the dozers. This photo shows Billy digging the core trench for a groundwater dam. We used the same techniques for building the wetlands at Sand Fork that we used at Pine Creek the year before. Here's the crew installing a water control structure in one of the wetlands. We were on site 100% of the time while heavy equipment was operating to carefully monitor the height and the slopes of the dams we were building. Great care was taken to seed and mulch the dams as they were constructed so that plants would germinate and grow to control erosion. The wetlands filled with water during the winter of 1996 and 1997. This was amazing because the wetlands had small watersheds with only ephemeral streams entering them. You can see there is very little vegetation growing on the new dams. The green color of wheat would be visible if conditions were suitable for it to germinate and grow. We had problems with the new dams being eroded by floodwater during the winter of 1996 and 97. There was a flood that caused Sand Fork Creek to flow over its banks and race across the floodplain. The floodwater overtopped the dams we had built. The red arrows show where Sand Fork Creek flowed over the dams. The greatest damage occurred where the dams had been built at right angles to the flow of water in the stream. Even though we had built low dams with gradual slopes, the exposed soil was quick to erode and cause gullies to form. There was less erosion where the constructed dams were built that were parallel to the stream. The red arrow shows where floodwater racing down the narrow spillway carved a deep gully. The cover on the water control structure caught logs and debris. The mud and debris filled the drain pipes and twisted the water control structures. This water control structure could not be repaired, so we had to install an overflow pipe on the back side of the dam. Water flowing around the water control structure also caused erosion. Here Nelson Kruger and Ed McFan are working to unplug one of the drain pipes. We waited for the soil to dry and brought in a dozer and an operator to regrade the dams. At the same time, Eddie and Ed modified the inlets to the drain pipes to reduce the probability of beaver blocking them. I returned to Sand Fork on July 27, 2024, and inspected the wetlands we had built 8 years ago. The wetlands looked good with no problems with erosion or muskrat burrowing. The largest wetland we had built was full of water. The water shield was growing in open water and cattails were growing along the shore. Hibiscus was growing in the saturated soil. Willows were growing around the edge of the smaller vernal pond wetland that was near the stream. The wetland we had built on the east side of Sand Fork looked great. Overall, I was very pleased with how Sand Fork wetlands were developing. This is the smallest wetland we built at Sand Fork. The photo was taken on May 23, 2022. This was 26 years after construction. The site had developed into a forested wetland with small pools of water. The vernal pools in the forested wetland dry in the summer. Here's the largest wetland we built 26 years after construction. You can see that the dam is growing trees and shrubs. The wetland is uniform in depth and contains an abundance of emergent vegetation. These photos show a lush growth of American lotus in the largest wetland. The photo was taken by Ashley Kofluski on August 28, 2025. Beautiful flowering hibiscus called marshmallows in old books are growing on the dams. The hibiscus is an important plant for pollinators. Its large, vibrant, and nectar-rich flowers are prime attractions for hummingbirds, butterflies, and native bees during the summer. Ashley Kofluski and I inspected the Sand Fork wetlands on January 16, 2026. This was 30 years after construction. The wetlands contained water and looked good. The cloudy water under the ice shows where beaver have been swimming. The sign describing the project had faded, but it was still readable. The smallest wetland contained vernal pools surrounded by willow trees. The pooled water was where we had removed soil to make the dam. The water in the vernal pools was primarily groundwater. The dam didn't appear to be holding water. However, I was very pleased with how natural this wetland looked. We found and examined the inlet to the water control structure. It was a 6-inch diameter PVC plastic pipe that was attached to a 90-degree gasketed elbow. Beaver tried to bury the inlet to the pipe, but they weren't successful. I suspect they quit trying when the water level in the vernal pond dropped. The inside of the pipe was dry. This indicated that sections of the pipe had separated and the pipe was leaking. We found the outlet of the pipe that had been buried under the dam. There were no signs that water had been flowing through the pipe. The Forest Service maintains a path on top of the dam that's used to access a bird survey point. The top and slopes of the dam had not been mowed for years. The next site that caught my attention was where we had built a low-water crossing across Sand Fork to reach a wetland construction site on the other side. We built the low-water crossing the same as if one were constructing a buried vertical grade control structure and a riffle in a stream. This was done by sloping the vertical banks on either side and then digging a trench that keyed into the banks on either side. We filled the trench with angular rock from 6 to 12 inches in diameter and compacted this rock using the tracks on the dozer. The structure was responsible for controlling head cuts that had been moving upstream for many years. The stream is narrower and shallower upstream of the rock structure. Water is flowing over the rock and not causing erosion on either side. We see a deep pool immediately downstream of the rock crossing. The deep pool was caused by head cuts moving upstream that were stopped by the rock. Large trees are falling into the stream downstream of the rock. This shows that the stream is cutting deeper and wider because of the head cuts that formed when the stream was moved many years ago. The wetland on the east side of Sand Fork was full of water. The inside slope of the dam was saturated and was wet meadow wetland. The top and the back side of the dam were dry and growing trees and shrubs. This showed that the beaver had not blocked the water control structure or the spillway and that the water level was at the designed elevation. We identified many muskrat burrows in the dam that had underwater entrances. The row of bubbles under the ice and the turbid water show that muskrats are currently using the burrows to live in the dam. I used the shovel to break the ice over the muskrat run and then stirred up the soil with my shovel to make the water cloudy. Watching closely, we could see the turbid water following the muskrat run into the dam. This showed that muskrats had dug a hole in the dam and water was flowing under the dam. We were excited to find the nests from the great blue heron rookery in sycamore trees along the shore of the wetland. A large diameter plastic pipe made it easy to find the water control structure. The vertical pipes served no purpose other than to show the person mowing the dam where the structure was located so they wouldn't run it over. The metal box covering the top of the water control structure was visible next to the pipe. We opened the metal box to find that the gasketed plates had been removed from the structure, and this was done to allow water to pass through to the other side. There was a gasketed 90-degree elbow with a short section of vertical pipe that was attached to the end of the drain pipe, and this served as the overflow pipe. Water was flowing out of the top of the pipe like what you would see in a large drinking fountain. The top of the water in the pipe was the same as that of the water level in the wetland on the other side of the dam. They most likely installed this overflow pipe after seeing that the primary water control structure in the dam had been damaged by the flood. The vertical overflow pipe had been pushed over by a flood. We decided to make it vertical again because this would return the water level in the wetland to its designed elevation and hopefully make the dam too wet for muskrats to make a home in the dam. We would need to return to cut the trees growing next to the pipe and then attach the pipe to the metal fence post using galvanized wire, not the plastic zip ties that had broke. Raising the water level in the wetland was not likely to harm the muskrats. The presence of numerous muskrat houses in the wetland shows that at least some of the muskrats could build their own homes. The numerous small bays dug in the dam had been made by muskrats and beaver over many years. Walking on top of the dam, we could see that these bays matched burrows going under the dam. I now recommend removing the 90-degree elbow water control structure and blocking the outlet of the drain pipe or the water-type cap that has a rubber gasket. Blocking the drain pipe would raise the water level in the wetland. When water begins flowing over the dam, beaver can be expected to block the flow by building a low dam on top of the clay dam, thereby turning the dam into a wetland and eliminating the need for future maintenance. This is the largest wetland we built at Sand Fork. The video shows the wetland 30 years after it was constructed. Like all the other wetlands at Sand Fork, you'll see one or more beaver lodges in the wetland. The beaver built this lodge on top of the dam we had constructed. Beaver had dug canals to the top of the dam. None of these canals were found to be draining water from the wetland. Beaver appeared to fill the canals with plants and soil once they detected water flowing over the dam. The canals appeared to be pathways that were connecting the larger wetland with smaller wetlands and with Sand Fork Creek. We found holes in the top of the dam where muskrat burrows had collapsed. The metal fence posts show where the inlet to the water control structure was modified to prevent beaver from blocking it with soil. The modification has kept beaver from blocking the pipe for 30 years. The black metal box had been placed over the top of the water control structure that was originally installed in the dam. A 90-degree elbow with an overflow pipe was later installed at the backside of the dam after the water control structure in the dam failed. You can see that the water level in the structure on the inlet side is higher than the outlet side. This shows that the plastic plates with their rubber gaskets are still helping to maintain water in the wetland. We could not adjust the position of the plates in the structures because we did not have the special tool for doing this. This is a plastic plate from the inline water control structure. The red arrows point to where the rubber gasket is missing. The gaskets are easily damaged when removing or installing them in a water control structure. Another problem is that the remaining sections of gasket are compressed. Broken and compressed gaskets can cause the water control structure to leak, and the wetland would not hold water as planned. The overflow pipe on the backside of the dam was leaking where the 90-degree elbow joined the vertical overflow pipe.
Wow.
So what I'm doing here is I'm cleaning off the oxidation, the algae, and then what I can see here is that there's water flowing where the pipes come together. There's a stream of water. And one thing about hydraulic pressure, when the water level comes up, we're going to have more of a leak. Now I'm going to move it. Let's see what happens. You catch that?
Mm-hmm.
So as the water level comes up in the wetland, the leak is going to get worse because of the hydraulic pressure. It should not be leaking when I wiggle it. I should not be able to wiggle it. Because of the expense and difficulty replacing the leaking pipes, I recommend cleaning the outside of the pipes and then using wide waterproof tape to cover the leaking joint between the pipes to see if that would stop the leak. I have learned so much by looking at these wetlands that we started building 30 years ago on the Wayne National Forest. They're just tremendous habitats, but what I've learned is that if you add water control structures, it's a weakness and it can cause the wetland to fail, just like building a dam is going to require maintenance because of beaver and because of muskrats. We built this small wetland at the same time as we are building the larger wetland and used the soil to build the dam for the large wetland. This small wetland was built without a dam or water control structure. The wetland was in excellent condition with no maintenance needed. Here's another small wetland we built between the large wetland and Sand Fork Creek. This wetland dries in the summer and provides breeding habitat for a diversity of amphibians. This small vernal pond wetland only took us 1 hour to build. We built this wetland in a canopy gap between the larger trees. Instead of trying to build large impoundments that will require maintenance, consider building a series of smaller wetlands like these. We designed these wetlands in the small canopy gaps between the larger trees in the forest. The smaller wetlands were easy and inexpensive to build without having to worry about the work and the expense that comes with building dams and installing water control structures. These small wetlands are supplied primarily with groundwater. They're about the same size as the vernal ponds that form when a large tree falls over near a stream and there's a seasonally high water table. Let's leave the Sand Fork project and move to the Superior Wetland project that was completed in Lawrence County on the Wayne National Forest in 1998. The intent of the Superior project was to improve habitat for wildlife and plants, control flooding, and provide for public use of the habitat, especially hunting. We built the wetlands on large agricultural fields that had been created years ago by moving streams and by draining wetlands. The red polygons show where we built 3 impoundments by constructing dams and installing water control structures with drain pipes. Billy and Donnie Osborne from Morgan County, Kentucky, operated the 2 dozers that were used to complete the project. Prior to construction of the dams, we dug a series of deep test holes with the dozers to confirm that the texture of soil in the fields was high in clay. We often had to change the location of the dam we were building to avoid large areas of sand. Here we're using an optical level to help us adjust the elevation of plates in the water control structure. We now use a laser level with dual-sided grade rod for this purpose. This photo shows the water control structure and the overflow pipe we installed on the backside of a dam in one of the wetlands we built at Superior. The water control structure is made by attaching a Schedule 35 gasketed 90-degree elbow to the outlet of the drain pipe and then inserting a short section of pipe into the other end of the 90-degree elbow to serve as an overflow pipe. The water level in the wetland will be the same as the elevation of the top of the vertical pipe. To drain the wetland, one simply rotates the vertical pipe so that it is parallel to the ground. A diversity of native hardwood trees were planted in the fields surrounding the new wetlands. Kathy Flagel's expertise as a silviculturalist and the hard work of the contract planting crew are the main reasons why we see a diversity of trees growing around the wetlands. Here's the crew that planted the trees at the Superior Wetlands. Here, Earl J. Osborne is congratulating Kathy Flagel on the completion of the Superior Wetland project. Here's how the wetlands we built for the Superior project appeared in April 1999. The large green mound is an island that's growing wheat that was sown for erosion control. The dam is also growing wheat and showing no signs of erosion. This new wetland looks like a farm pond with its straight edges and open water. On June 6, 1999, a dedication ceremony was held for the Superior Wetland project. This Google Earth aerial photo shows how the Superior Wetlands appeared on August 5, 2025, which is 27 years after construction. The red lines show the dams that were built to make the impoundments in 1998. One can still read the sign that was erected after the wetlands were built. I was very pleased with how natural the wetlands appeared. The diversity of native plants was amazing. The wetlands were not dominated by cattails or phragmites like what you see with other wetland projects. The wetlands we built 27 years ago were both beautiful and diverse. You could never guess that these wetlands had been constructed using heavy equipment and agricultural fields. The cricket frogs were calling in appreciation. Sedges, rushes, burrweed, willow, and buttonbush were all growing along the shoreline of the wetlands. Water shield and water lilies were growing in the deeper water where soil had been removed to build the dams. These wetlands were being naturally supplied with precipitation, not with water from pumps or diversions. The wetlands we built for the Superior project were surrounded by wetlands beaver created after the dozers left the site. The beaver built dams across the ditch streams that were bordering each of the constructed wetlands. Their actions flooded the tree buffers that we had left along the streams. The good news was that beaver were maintaining the dams that they had built on a 24-hour basis. You're looking at the top of one of the dams we built for the Superior project. The entire dam had become a wet meadow and a shrub-scrub wetland. I couldn't believe that this was a dam, and I was there during construction. The top of the dam was saturated and inundated by shallow water. Here, the top of the dam is supporting a dense growth of buttonbush, a native flowering shrub that's of great value to pollinators. Buttonbush was growing on the top of this dam with elderberry and ash trees growing in the topsoil we had used to build the backside of the dam. Personnel from the Ohio Division of Wildlife previously mowed the dams for the U.S. Forest Service. However, mowing the dams is no longer possible because the soil has become too saturated to support the weight of a tractor, which would become stuck and risk being pulled into the water. Routine mowing is no longer necessary as the dams are now being maintained by beaver and have become permanent, self-sustaining parts of the landscape. This video shows a ditch where water has been backed up by a beaver dam constructed downstream. The outlet of the drain pipe is now submerged under approximately 4 feet of water impounded by the beaver dam. The beaver have also excavated a canal that connects the flooded ditch to a large adjacent wetland. Water levels in the ditch and in the wetland are the same. This indicates that the drain pipe is plugged. As a result, the plugged drain pipe has raised the water level in the wetlands by approximately 6 inches. Beaver have also constructed a dam across the wetland spillway that's located at the base of the hill. This dam has raised the water level in the wetland by an additional 6 inches, bringing it up to the same elevation as the top of the dam when it was originally built. As water began flowing over the constructed dam, beaver built additional dams made out of plants and soil on top of the clay dam that we had constructed. The low dams built by beaver did not wash out because the wetlands were built so that floodwater from streams did not enter the wetland basins. Here is where water is flowing over the dam in a shallow canal that was dug by beaver. We rarely observed water flowing in these canals because they were almost always blocked by beaver. We stir up soil in the shallow canal that beaver dug across the dam. As we watch, the silt in the water is swirling, and this shows us that water is not flowing in the canal, which could cause a breach in the dam and drain the wetland. I have found that once beaver completely block a water control structure, including drain pipes and spillways, they actively manage water levels in a way that prevents the dam from washing out. This appears to be especially true in wetlands that were constructed with small watersheds where the large streams or deeply incised ditches do not deliver high-energy flows into the wetland. These photos show a water control structure we installed on the outlet of a drain pipe for the Superior project. 27 years later, both the area flooded by the dam and the area outside of the dam have become wetland. I think it's pretty good that we could install a drain pipe combined with an overflow pipe that generations of beaver could not block. Draining the wetland would be easy by simply rotating the upright pipe so it's parallel with the ground. However, beaver would likely block the inlet to the drain pipe if it was left open for more than a few days. Beaver built this beautiful wetland by blocking the shallow ditch we had excavated to drain water flowing from the water control structure on the backside of the dam. Beaver quickly moved into the wetlands that we built at Superior and immediately began modifying their outlets, often expanding the wetlands and creating additional wetland habitat. This map shows the wetlands we built for the Superior Wetland project. This aerial photo shows how the wetlands at Superior appear today. Now let's move back to the east into Gallia County and look at the wetlands we built for the Cadmus project. This was on the Wayne National Forest in 2004. This aerial photo taken on April 21st, 1994 shows the Cadmus site as farmland. Some of the ditches that were dug to drain the wetlands appear as dark lines. The red line showing the location of the dam we plan to build, which would be over 3,660 feet long and up to 4 feet high. We could not extend the impoundment further to the east because of the main water pipe for the community of Cadmus. This aerial photo shows the Cadmus wetland less than 1 year after construction. The light brown areas are where soil was moved by the dozers. The light blue polygons are the vernal pool wetlands we built outside of the dam. The yellow line shows a new section of dam that we built in 2007 to cut off an area of sand that was draining the new wetland we built. This aerial photo shows the Cadmus Wetland project after extensive work was done to get the dam to hold water as planned. Here's how the Cadmus Wetland project appeared 21 years after construction. The entire area that was surrounded by the dam had become wetland. This is how the large field at Cadmus looked when we first examined the site on October 10, 2003. The field had been cut for hay since the Forest Service purchased the farm. Kathy Flago, Eddie Park, and I set up an optical level and measured the change in elevation of the field we wanted to flood. The maximum change in elevation from upper to the lower edge of the field was 3 feet. This meant we would need to build a dam with a maximum height of 4 feet. 3 feet of the dam would be needed to hold water back to the upper edge of the field. We needed to add another foot of dam to allow for the spillway. We pounded a nail into a tree to serve as a benchmark for building the dam. The nail was set at the same elevation as the top of the dam that we wanted to build. We dug test holes using a soil auger to identify where the clay was located and any areas of sand that we had to avoid. Next, we marked the location of the dam we wanted to build using plastic flagging that was tied to shrubs and forbs. We intentionally located the dam away from a buried pipe that supplies water to the community of Cadmus. We are especially grateful to Rich Jones with the Forest Service for alerting us to the presence of this utility, as its location was not marked in the ground at the time. Eddie Park is near a ditch that was dug to divert runoff from the field many years ago. The red arrow points to where a beaver dam washed out in the ditch. This formed a head cut that's eroding. This linear wetland formed in the main ditch that was dug to drain the wetlands for creating the field over 100 years ago. The red dashed arrow shows where shrubs are growing over a clay tile drainage structure that was buried in the ground. The Forest Service issued a service contract to Osborne Dozer Service from Morgan County, Kentucky, to provide 2 dozers and skilled operators to build the wetlands. Here, Donnie Osborne is removing vegetation and topsoil from an area where the dam will be built. Billy and Donnie Osborne are removing topsoil in a strip from 200 to 300 feet wide that includes the location of the dam. Billy Osborne clears a place to begin the core trench for building a groundwater dam on high ground at the base of the hill. The dozer starts digging the hole for the core trench at one end of the dam. The way the soil rolls in front of the blade shows that it's high in clay. The dozer must dig deeper than any drainage structure that has been buried in the ground. All topsoil, sand, gravel, and large roots are removed from the hole that's being dug. We tried to dig the hole for the core trench at least 6 feet deep. Water is pooling in the bottom of the core trench because we cut through a clay tile drainage structure. We removed and disabled many drainage structures made from clay tile and slotted plastic pipe while digging the core trench. We were unable to dig the core trench as deep as needed because the dozer kept getting stuck in the saturated soil. I stood near the dozer while I was excavating the core trench so I could quickly signal the other dozer operator to come over and free the stuck machine. I connected the heavy chain myself so the operators did not have to climb in and out of their dozers. Looking back, we should not have attempted a project like this without using a large excavator. Now that the core trench is dug down to an impermeable layer of clay, the dozer backs up to the surface of the ground. The dozer then moves forward to scrape a layer of soil into the hole. The operator makes sure to continue digging at least as deep as the bottom of the hole as when we started. The dozer pushes the soil forward and then backs up to repeat the step. This is what I call the accordion method of digging a core trench. Ed McFan watches closely in front and behind of the blade of the dozer while the core trench is being dug. He watches for drain tiles and layers of sand that must be removed. The dozer operator cannot see the ground in front of the blade. That's why it's important to watch closely while the core trench is being dug. The dozer now works to fill the core trench with soil that is high in clay and compacts each layer with the tracks of the machine. Once the clay soil in the core trench has been spread and compacted, the dozer operator fills low places with clay, and he gets this clay from in front of the dam where the topsoil was removed. The clay soil is spread in layers 6 inches thick, with each layer being compacted by the dozer, and the dozer travels over each layer 3 or more times. Filling and compacting clay in the core trench takes time, but it's of great importance if the dam is to hold water as planned. Once the core trench is filled with soil that's compacted, we call it a groundwater dam. The next step is to build a dam on top of the groundwater dam. This is done by pushing up clay soil in layers, compacting and shaping each layer to form an above-ground dam. The dozers obtain the soil needed to build the dam by backing up to the edge of the area where topsoil is removed and then pushing clay forward, spreading the soil in layers that are compacted and shaped to form the dam. Billy and Donnie Osborne were highly skilled at making dams that held water. Here they're moving soil from the wetland basin being dug towards the dam that they're building. The clay soil is placed in front of the topsoil and vegetation that was removed. The pile of soil is spread, shaped, and compacted by running over it many times. The process of building up the dam in layers is repeated many times. Slowly, you can see the dam being built. Billy is now using the dozer to level the top of the dam and to make gradual slopes. Leveling the top of the dam and shaping slopes requires a great deal of skill. At this stage, I'm taking elevations and using wire flags to show the dozer operators where the dam is high or where it's low. Here, Billy is placing a gradual slope on the backside of the dam so it can be mowed with a tractor. The gradual slopes are less likely to be damaged by muskrats and beaver. This is the water control structure and inlet pipe that Eddie Park installed in the Cadmus wetland. The inlet was modified so it was less likely to be blocked by beaver. We found out years later that beaver had buried the pipe and the water control structure under tons of vegetation and soil. The small area near the drain pipe filled with water during the winter of 2004 and 2005. Much to our disappointment, only part of the Cadmus wetland held water as planned. It took us 3 years and many visits to Cadmus to figure out why the impoundment was not holding water and how it could be repaired. I carefully examined the basin and the dam in the summer of 2005 and dug more holes with a soil auger to test for clay and sand. While examining the basin where the soil had been disturbed by heavy equipment, I noticed hundreds of crayfish burrows and their chimneys. Removing the chimneys, I could see that the burrows were dry and they should have been full with water. Water from the surface was flowing into the crayfish burrows, then down into permeable layers of sand that carried water under the dam. On August 7, 2006, I returned to Cadmus to work with Eddie Park and Ferris Osborne to dig a series of deep test holes with the excavator. The deep test holes showed us there were layers of sand from 5 to 14 feet underground with silt clay texture soil on top. We confirmed that the crayfish were digging burrows through the clay into the sand where the groundwater was present. The dozers did not interrupt the sand layer with the core trench and the groundwater dam because they kept getting stuck in the quicksand that was found in the bottom of the trench. The deep test hole showed us we needed to build a new section of dam to avoid the large area where sand was near the surface. We would also need to dig sections of the core deeper to interrupt these sand layers. An excavator would be needed to complete these repairs. Eddie Park and I were sitting on the tailgate of the pickup, eating lunch after a long morning digging deep test holes with the excavator operator in this big open field, and we were trying to figure out how to get the wetland to hold water. Out of nowhere, an elderly man walked up to us on the road. The first thing I noticed was his hat, a University of Kentucky cap. This struck me as strange because we are deep in Ohio. He was clearly upset. When I told him we were trying to build a wetland in that field, he told us flat out it was a waste of time and taxpayers' money and that it wouldn't work. He was sweating badly and clearly overheated, so I asked him to get out of the sun and to sit down with us on the tailgate. Eddie handed him a bottle of water and we waited him for it to cool down a bit. After a bit, his anger softened. He told us his name was Ed Miller and they had grown up on the very farm we were trying to flood. He said that the Bob Evans of restaurant fame had grown up in the same farmhouse too. Ed's family moved there in 1927 when he was just a year old. His father bought 162 acres for only $4,000, and this included 100 acres of bottomland. Then he started talking about the water. He remembered the fields being flooded so often that he had to climb over the mountain to get to school. He remembered catching catfish that were swimming in the field after the floods and carrying them back to the creek. He called the place a swamp, big trees, yellow grasses, wet ground everywhere. His father said he sweated blood to dry out the land so it could be farmed. Then Ed looked right at me and said, "You'll never get that pond to hold water." I tried explaining what we were doing, but he wouldn't budge. Finally asked him why. He said, "You didn't get the drain tiles. I told him we had, 4 to 6 feet deep." He shook his head. "You missed the deep ones." That's when the story changed. Ed said he had helped his father install the clay drain tiles in ditches that were 12 feet deep. His father dug the ditches by hand, 12 feet deep by 6 feet wide. The bottom was quicksand, so he had to stand on 10-inch wide boards to keep from sinking, moving them along as he dug. He was so strong he could heave the dirt completely out of the 12-foot deep ditch. There were no levels, no instruments. His father judged slope by watching how the water moved in the ditch. He had to dig that deep cut through the ridge of soil along the creek that had acted like a dam and flooded the field. The drain tile outlet had to be the same elevation as the stream when it was installed. Once the ditch was dug, his father had to lay 4-inch clay tiles along the bottom. He bought semi-truck loads of these and hauled them in from Jackson County. Ed helped cover them by lowering buckets of soil down with a rope. Where they couldn't afford to buy the tile, his father buried wooden boxes made out of slab wood. He drained other fields with shallow ditches and hundreds of 2-inch diameter clay tiles that had been cured in the sun. By the time Ed finished talking, we understood why our wetlands wouldn't hold water. The wetlands had been drained by somebody who understood both hydrology and engineering and was willing to work harder than anyone else I know to drain the swamp. Before he left, Ed told us that when his father was 84, he sold the farm out from under him to his brother. I felt sorry for Ed Miller. Eddie and I knew we had to go back with an excavator and find the clay tiles that were buried 12 feet deep that were installed using a shovel almost 100 years ago. Later, the Forest Service contracted Ferris Osborne to use an excavator to repair the wetland. Ferris Osborne was no relation to Earl J. Osborne, who built the Cadmus wetland. The repair work done by Ferris Osborne was very successful. Here's how the Cadmus wetland appeared on March 13, 2008. Ashley Kaflewski and I examined the Cadmus wetland project on April 20, 2023, and this was 10 years after the wetlands were built. Let's see what we found. This wet meadow is growing a plant called burrweed. It's beautiful in the spring. This wet meadow is growing bulrushes and buttonbush. Here's a wet meadow that developed around a vernal pond that we built outside of a constructed dam. We built this small wetland in an area that's impounded by the dam. It contains water about 20 inches deep. The large impoundment contains emergent wetlands that are bordered by scrub-shrub wetlands and forested wetlands. This small peninsula adds diversity to the wetland. It's an old beaver lodge. This emergent wetland formed after 2 feet of soil was removed to build the dam. Large areas within the impoundment were built to contain shallow water. These now support a diversity of aquatic plants. The aquatic plants came in on their own because there was no seeding or planting of aquatics after the wetlands were built. This section of the drain pipe on the surface shows that buried drainage structures were removed when the wetlands were built. Some of the clay drain tiles removed during construction were 12 feet deep. The turbid water indicates beaver activity and possibly carp swimming in the water. This shallow canal was built by beaver over the dam of the impoundment. The canal is lower than the elevation of the spillway, so water is flowing in the canal like a stream. This is partially draining the impoundment. The turbid water shows that erosion is occurring. Sections of the canal may be filled with soil using a shovel to stop this erosion. Here's another canal that beaver built over the impoundment dam that has caused an erosional head cut. The breach can be repaired using hand tools to reduce the risk of the dam failing. Here's a collapsed muskrat burrow in the dam that can also be filled with a shovel. This small wetland was built to provide habitat for waterfowl, amphibians, and reptiles. The tree seedlings show that the vernal pond has a short hydro period. Toad and frog larvae were abundant in the shallow water wetland that we built without a dam or a water control structure. Here's another vernal pond we constructed. All the vernal ponds we built were in good condition and there was no need for maintenance. This area contains high-quality emergent wetland habitat. The impoundment contains large areas of wet meadow wetland and vernal pools, and these are ideal for spring peepers and chorus frog breeding. Here's an area of wet meadow and emergent wetland within the impoundment. This small wetland was built to contain shallow water. Beaver later built a dam across the spillway, making it much deeper. This is another vernal pond that we built. This forested wetland developed in a smaller wetland that we built. We purposely built shallow vernal pools like this one so they would have a short hydro period. Each of the constructed wetlands contained a unique diversity of plants. This island was formed by beaver when they covered the inlet to the water control structure that we installed in the large impoundment. The water control structure is now blocked and buried under tons of soil. Trying to repair the structure would be expensive and time-consuming with little, if any, benefit. This emergent wetland is part of the impoundment. The wetland appears natural and is being used by great blue herons, Canada geese, red-winged blackbirds, belted kingfisher, and green frogs. Great blue herons built a rookery in the large tree overlooking the wetland. Portions of the impoundment contain shallow pools of water that are being used by toads for breeding. Here's another one of the smaller wetlands that was built. The willows have naturally colonized the site. Large areas of shrub-scrub wetland that are growing alder, buttonbush, and willow have developed in the impoundment. We observed snipe using the shrub-scrub wetlands. These areas were built by building a groundwater dam that disabled drainage structures and then setting the elevation of the groundwater approximately 6 inches below the surface. This forested wetland is a bonus. Beaver built it by blocking the spillway of one of the smaller wetlands that we had built. You'll find large areas of emergent, scrub, and forested wetlands at Cadmus. I'd like to summarize what I have learned after examining the wetlands that we have built on the Wayne National Forest over the last 31 years. Number one, if you build a wetland with a water control structure, a dam, and a drain pipe, it's going to have to be maintained, and there's a high probability there won't be anyone around to maintain that wetland after you're gone. The wetland restoration program on the Ironton Ranger District is a success. The wetlands are providing habitat for a diversity of wildlife and plant species. Many of the impoundments we built have become naturally appearing and functioning wetlands. The hard work and the dedication of Forest Service personnel, partners, and contractors was worth it. Most of the wetlands are self-sustaining and no longer need maintenance. We found that wetlands can be built without the use of drain pipes, water control structures, or dams, eliminating the need for long-term maintenance. The Ironton Ranger District has greater potential for restoring wetlands and streams than any other ranger district in the entire National Forest system. I encourage agency personnel to continue this amazing program. I am amazed how good these wetlands look that were built as many as 30 years ago. They look like naturally functioning and they're just beautiful ecosystems. Well, I hope you'll be interested in building wetland areas because the ones that we built on the Wayne National Forest look like they're going to last forever. Well, if you like this video, please press the like button, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes, and I wish you every success restoring and building wetlands in your community.
I'm Kathy Flagel. I worked on the Wayne Forest for about 20 years, 10 as a forester and about 10 as a wildlife biologist. I knew that in Ohio, 90% of the wetlands had been destroyed. And then I was intrigued when I learned that most of the lowlands on the Wayne National Forest had been old farmlands and had been drained artificially with those clay pipes. And then I learned that those could be disrupted and berms built and you could recreate wetlands. Yeah, I remember one of the things I do remember was sitting out. Yeah, I have to mention that one with you and me sitting out on the tailgate of a truck in the middle of that field. And you were interviewing me, ironically enough, for I think your first book. Oh. And it was blazing hot. And I kept thinking, how is this guy even thinking clearly? Because I was just ready to like burst into flames, and suddenly I just couldn't stand it any longer. And I remember bursting out saying, "Holy crap, it's hot out of here." So when you mentioned that, boy, yeah, I mean, that was the same day.
That's a good story. Yes, that's. If you had to do it all over again, is there anything you would change with the wetland projects?
Well, if I'd known about it, I would have definitely tried to make them as maintenance free as possible. That would be the main thing. You mentioned was when we rented a straw spreader at
Okay.
Superior to spread the straw quicker.
Right.
And then we set it on fire. So that was exciting.
Do you remember, did it destroy it or did you?
I don't think it did, but as I recall, because also I recall that the rental place gave us another one. Why they would do that, I don't know, but
That's a good story there. But
yeah,
the video will be a good way of documenting what we did. I think it'll be fun for people to
that's
see.
probably my proudest achievement in my whole career is the wetlands. I think that
Oh, that's good to hear.
wouldn't have done it without your help, so I really do appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you too.